ADP and rankings aren't everything, but sometimes you're doing a best ball draft or a way too early mock, and you just can't believe how far some players have fallen. These are some insanely underrated players that you should be taking advantage of right now.
Now, if you're thinking it's May, how can you be drafting? Well, then you need to check out Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy has best ball drafts going full swing right now, all the way up until the season. They have drafts ranging from $4 to $500, with prize pools ranging from $100,000 to $15 million. That's right, $15 million in their flagship Best Ball Mania 5. If you haven't tried Underdog Fantasy yet, this is the time to do it. Just make sure when you sign up, you use our promo code ENDGAME and take advantage of this special offer. They're going to give you a special pick plus up to $250 in bonus cash. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com, sign up using promo code ENDGAME, start drafting right now, and take advantage of this special offer.
All right, Chris, what's the first screaming value that catches your eye?
The first one that catches my eye is DeAndre Swift. Look, I get it with DeAndre Swift. Early in his career, he was probably overrated, and now he's being underrated because expectations have been so high for this guy, and the results just haven't been there. But I don't think talent has ever been the issue. It's been durability and trust from the coaches. Last year, we saw both of those. He played every game, and he had the trust from his coaches. And what did he do? He ran for over 1,000 yards for the first time in his career. Great. Unfortunately, he only had 6 touchdowns. Why? Because Jalen Hurts sneaks in every touchdown from the 1-yard line. I remember a quote from Jason Kelsey. He even said, hey, I tell the running backs when they first get here, just don't get tackled at the 1-yard line. If you do, you're not going to score. Sorry, it's just the way it is. Also, he had less than 46 catches for the first time in his career. But again, also because of Jalen Hurts, because Jalen Hurts is just not a guy that will check it down. Eyes always down the field. If nothing's there, take off and run. Well, both those things should be fixed this year because now he's with the Bears. They're going to have a rookie QB. And while I like Caleb Williams, and I think Caleb Williams is going to be great, I don't think Caleb Williams is going to be doing the tush push from the 1-yard line repeatedly every week. I also don't think Caleb Williams is going to be afraid to check it down. He's a rookie. He's going to take easy throws when they're there sometimes. We should see DeAndre Swift once again with the trust of his team. They paid him very good money to come be the starting running back there, in my opinion, in an offense that will be very good this year. They have so many weapons on this offense. They've beefed up the offensive line. He'll get dump-offs from Caleb Williams, and he won't get vultured at the goal line. So I think this year, DeAndre Swift will finally realize the potential we've all been wanting to see. And now he's being so severely underrated, not even inside the top 80 players, that you almost have to take a chance on him.
Yeah, for a running back, probably more than any position, being on a good offense is very helpful. But sometimes it actually can be beneficial when the offense is struggling in the passing game because more touches, more opportunities, and more dump-offs. So that brings to mind Ramondre Stevenson for New England. Now, a lot of people are kind of off Ramondre because last year he was a disappointment. I get it. He was, because the year before that, he was a fantasy RB1. A lot of that because it was on the strength of his receptions, and he was really good as far as running between the tackles, yards per carry. All of it was there. But then last year just wasn't as effective early, and then finally, once he got it going, he was injured, and then we saw his season end prematurely. So altogether, what we remember is if you drafted Ramondre, he was a bust, right? That's pretty much the beginning and the end of it. So what do you expect this year? A rookie quarterback, or probably to begin the season, a journeyman veteran like Jacoby Brissett, just to kind of hold the place temporarily? A bunch of rookies at receiver, a rookie head coach. How can this be good for a running back? Well, it's good because no matter whether you get, the kind of game manager backup like Brissett or the rookie in Drake May, it's going to be a run-heavy offense. And don't forget that this rookie head coach, Jared Mayo, is a defensive guy. It's not going to be some explosive offense. They're going to run. They're going to run a lot. And Ramondre will probably get just as many receptions as he had a couple years ago, if not more. Now, the only thing is they brought in somebody who's more of a receiving running back to complement him in Antonio Gibson. But really, at this point, are we worried about Antonio Gibson? Ramondre is still going to be a workhorse. He's still going to get a ton of touches. And I think we have to treat him that way. Now, is it possible that there's a number one receiver on a pass-heavy offense that's actually going under the radar?
There is. And Christian Kirk is insanely underrated every single year. I mean, it's like clockwork. Every year, you can just grab Christian Kirk in round 5, round 6, round 7, depending on your league, and be completely happy with your pick. Last year, prior to his injury, he scored 14 or more PPR points in every single game except week 1, which was that weird, remember week 1 game where he only got 1 target? He only played 60% of the snaps. No idea what was going on there. But outside of that game, 14 or more PPR points in every single game. Not a lot of wide receivers give you that. And he had 6 or more targets in every single game. And look at this Jags offense. Calvin Ridley, the guy who was supposed to be the number 1 wide receiver last year, is gone. Yes, they drafted Brian Thomas Jr. I like Brian Thomas Jr., but he's a rookie. He's not Marvin Harrison. He's going to need time. He's not going to just come in day 1 and just demand a ton of targets and dominate this passing game. Christian Kirk's going to be the number 1 guy here still in this offense. He knows the offense well. He knows Trevor Lawrence well. And not to mention, he gets those juicy slot matchups. He primarily plays out of the slot. He gets those easier matchups. If he had not gotten hurt last year, who knows how good he would have been. Maybe he wouldn't be underrated this year. But because he got injured and then came back and wasn't as good to end the season, he's once again underrated. But I will happily continue to draft Christian Kirk in the middle of my fantasy drafts. He routinely goes outside the top 30 wide receivers. Are you serious? He's not going to be a top 30 wide receiver? This is absolutely insane. Give me all the Christian Kirk where he goes in drafts.
And then a stud receiver is going even later than that is Chris Godwin in Tampa. Now, he's not the number 1 target in Tampa. I get that. It's Mike Evans. And it feels like as soon as Baker Mayfield took over, he only had eyes for Evans, right? So I don't necessarily think that's going to change this year, but there are a couple reasons why I think Godwin is still being undervalued. So first of all, he at least did pull out a 1,000-yard season, right? It's not like Godwin was worthless. It was disappointing, sure, compared to some expectations, compared to how Evans did, but it's not like Godwin was bad. Here's the big change, the big difference between him and Evans is touchdowns, right? Evans, we know, is a red zone monster. That's nothing new. But Godwin, only 2 touchdowns. Now, regression always happens, and it goes both ways, both positive and negative. You figure Godwin, at the very least, is going to score more than twice. Remember, this is a new offensive coordinator in town there because Dave Canales did leave. Now we're going to have maybe some different looks, use receivers in different ways, and they're already talking about this. You covered this not too long ago, was that Chris Godwin is going to be moved around a little bit more. They're going to try to get him more involved intentionally because you can only funnel targets through one receiver for so long. Godwin's a quality receiver. I don't think that he's going to be necessarily a top 10 receiver this year. But, man, when I see him going in underdog drafts, right around guys like Keon Coleman and Brian Thomas, these rookies who not only am I not that high on this year, but they're rookies who aren't necessarily even the number 1 target on their team. I mean, come on. I'll take Godwin happily over those guys every day. Now, is it even possible for a quarterback to be underrated in fantasy?
It is when there's a quarterback who so far in his career on a points per game basis has finished as the QB 11, the QB 3, the QB 4, and the QB 7. And then you can draft him as about the QB 10 in fantasy drafts, and that is Kyler Murray this year. For some reason, Kyler Murray just always seems underrated. Even when Kyler Murray is playing well and putting up huge fantasy numbers, it's like people are like, I don't really like Kyler Murray. I think he's overrated. Well, I think he's underrated, to be honest, especially for fantasy. Look, last year, he coming back from ACL, only played the second half of the season. Marquise Brown missed a lot of those games. He had nobody really to throw to. I mean, Trey McBride was like the only guy he could throw to, and he still put up decent fantasy games. But what I was really encouraged by last year was the fact that he was on pace for over 500 rushing yards if he had played a full 17-game season. This was first year back from ACL. That was our big worry. Is he going to run? Well, he would have ran for over 500 yards. Now, fully healthy, I expect that number to be 800 rushing yards. And oh, by the way, they actually did add a rookie wide receiver who is ready to step in day 1 and be an impact maker. And that is Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the best wide receiver prospects we have seen in years. And he still does have Trey McBride there. He still has guys like Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, for whatever that's worth. But just the fact that he has that true alpha number 1 wide receiver, a new coaching staff, and not to mention a healthy knee that is going to allow him to run like we're used to seeing with him, Kyler Murray has the potential to be a top 5 QB. And like I said, in a lot of drafts, he's going right around QB 10, which to me seems crazy.
Now, I know the fantasy community is going to be divided on Caleb Williams, right? Already people are talking about that overly exaggerated expectations for a guy. We've heard the term generational prospect before. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence was supposed to be a generational QB prospect. Hasn't quite been that yet. Number one overall picks definitely don't always pan out. I'm not convinced necessarily that Caleb Williams is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in all the NFL just yet. But man, I don't see any reason not to be in on him this year because the Bears have done everything they could possibly do to set him up for success. So you already talked earlier about DeAndre Swift and that running game, and he's got that support system there, an actual running back who can not only run but is a really good receiver out of the backfield. That's always nice. He's got receivers like DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, first-round pick Rome Odunze. Yeah, he's set up for success far more than a guy like C.J. Stroud last year. Just think about C.J. Stroud and how good his season was, how high we are on him last season. His best receivers were Nico Collins and Tank Dell, right? Nico Collins is a good player, but are you going to tell me you really think he's better than Keenan Allen, DJ Moore? What about Tank Dell? I know Stroud, that's his guy, and he likes him, but I think it's safe to say Rome Odunze is a far better prospect. So he definitely has all the tools at his disposal to succeed, and probably a better running game as well. Oh, and 2 good pass-catching tight ends. Caleb Williams almost doesn't have to think about it. He can just throw the ball anywhere across the field. He'll find a really good receiver who can catch it. So I don't see why Williams can't have a Stroud-like season. And if you think about the fact that Stroud was a top 10 fantasy QB last year, why are we not treating Williams with that same kind of potential? He's basically being looked at as a backup. Caleb Williams, I feel like, is just being almost undervalued despite being the top pick in the NFL draft, which is still weird to me. All right, let's keep going. Who else do you think is being massively undervalued?
I'm going to go back to Jacksonville, and I don't understand why every single year Evan Ingram is just an afterthought in fantasy drafts at the tight end position. 2 years ago when he first got to Jacksonville, slow start. But then what did he do in the second half? He won people fantasy championships. He was carrying fantasy teams. Last year, same thing. Helped people win fantasy championships. He averaged more points per game last year than tight ends like Mark Andrews, Trey McBride, George Kittle, all 3 who were being drafted ahead of Evan Ingram, and in the case of Andrews and McBride, way ahead of Evan Ingram. And I already talked about it when I talked about Christian Kirk. They lost a big chunk of targets with Calvin Ridley. Yes, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to take some of those targets, but again, he's a rookie. He's not going to come in day one and just command a ton of targets. It's going to be Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram again. They know the offense. The staff knows them. Trevor Lawrence knows them. These are their guys. And Evan Ingram, despite somehow getting this injury-prone label, has not missed a game for 2 straight years, and that includes the playoffs. Well, the 2 playoff games they played the year that they actually made the playoffs. That's 36 out of 36 games the last 2 years. There are no injury concerns here. I don't know what the concern is, to be honest. Evan Ingram has been a stud tight end 2 years in a row. He's been a stud fantasy tight end 2 years in a row, and guess what? He's probably going to do it a third year, and guess what? He's going to be so undervalued in your fantasy drafts. You're going to see him there, and you're even going to think, it's just Evan Ingram. But it's not just Evan Ingram. It's a potential league-winning tight end.
Now, I totally understand why people are devaluing Tyjae Spears. After all, we thought he was going to inherit the starting job there, and then they went and signed Tony Pollard. But I would argue this. Not only is he still going to have a role that's probably bigger than what he already had last year, he might actually be the better running back here. So if we recall, Tony Pollard, before he got paid by Tennessee, was a massive bust in fantasy last year. He was on one of the better offenses in the league in Dallas, and he barely averaged 4 yards of carry, didn't have any really big games. It's like he just scraped by on volume alone. And so I understand why Tennessee added a running back, but why are we so sure that Pollard's the guy there and Spears is just a backup? That's how they're being treated. Spears is going behind Pollard, but also Spears is being drafted as if he doesn't even have a role in your fantasy team, like a third running back, a fourth running back sometimes. Look, Tyjae Spears averaged 4.5 yards per carry as a rookie, and he caught a ton of passes despite being very far behind Derrick Henry. And as far as the depth chart, I know there's only 2 of them, but it's like when Derrick Henry got tired, he would come in once in a while, or if they were losing, and then Tyjae Spears would get some touches. He still managed to catch 52 passes. I mean, this is an offense that should be much better this year. They boosted the offensive line, of course, all the help at receiver they got with Calvin Ridley, and then Tony Pollard as well. But look, I think Spears could be the more efficient runner. I think Spears could wind up catching more passes than Pollard. I think Spears is still going to be very valuable in fantasy. I don't necessarily want him as a starting running back in fantasy to start the season unless it's a 0 RB team. But man, he's being treated as if he's almost worthless in fantasy. I think we are ignoring the possibility that he might wind up being even better than Tony Pollard this year. And you got another backup running back in mind along the same lines.
Yes, but is he a backup? I'm talking about Jerome Ford. Like, look, last year, after the Nick Chubb injury, we thought, okay, Jerome Ford's going to be the guy. This is his opportunity. And then for some reason, they went out and re-signed Kareem Hunt. And despite Kareem Hunt being absolutely awful, they kept giving him goal line carries. Jerome Ford only had 2 goal line carries last year, but somehow still scored 9 touchdowns. And despite only playing 53% of the snaps last year, was 14th in targets. He's a very good pass-catching running back. But he's also a pretty good between the tackles running back. And I really doubt this time the Browns are bringing back Kareem Hunt. If they were going to, they probably would have done it by now. Nick Chubb just had the most devastating knee injury a running back can possibly have. He's 29 years old. There's almost 0% chance he's going to start the season on the active roster. And when he does get on the active roster, whenever that is, he's going to be eased into action. We could see Jerome Ford be the starting running back to start the year. And even throughout the year, this could be a 1A, 1B because I don't know if Nick Chubb's ever going to be 100% this year. Look, last year it took until, week 6 for the Jets to fully give Breece Hall the complete, usage that we wanted to see. And that was basically because Dalvin Cook was awful and they had no choice. Jerome Ford is a capable player. He's a decent running back. No, he's not anything exceptional. He's not some elite talent, but he's good enough. He's in an offense that's going to run the football plenty. And he has this nose for the end zone. Some guys just have a nose for the end zone, and Jerome Ford has it. And right now, he's being completely forgotten in fantasy drafts. In your typical 12-team home league type of drafts, he probably won't even be drafted, even though this guy is probably going to start week 1 and maybe the first half of the season. So Jerome Ford right now, definitely insanely underrated.
I'm on board with that pick. And I'll tell you another one of my favorite late round picks in Best Ball Mania on Underdog is Demarcus Robinson. Technically the number 3 receiver on the Rams, but remember to finish last year, he was the number 2 guy. He was starting because Cooper Kupp was banged up. Now, I'm not going to predict health or anything like that, but Cooper Kupp has had all sorts of injuries lately. They might lean on Robinson either as a starter or as a number 3 guy, but this is an offense that passed the ball a lot last year. They're probably going to pass it again a lot. And so Robinson will benefit. You might recall if you were lucky enough to pick him up on the waiver wire last year, he had a 4-game touchdown streak right during the fantasy playoffs. And then in those games that he started, not including that final game of the season because it shouldn't count for fantasy anyways, but also remember they had nothing to play for, so he was just out there. But for the 3 games where he was actually a starter for fantasy purposes where it mattered, he averaged 72 yards per game. I mean, he was actually worth starting for a regular basis there. He might do it again this year because, again, Kupp just doesn't seem like the same Cooper Kupp we knew from before. And even in this offense, there's role for number 3 guy that could still be productive. But if you're looking at a late round target with huge upside, I mean, Demarcus Robinson clearly is one of the top number 3 receivers out there. You always got to be looking for value in your fantasy drafts, but you also want to find that breakout, the guy who could be a league winner. We have some breakout wide receivers here for you.